Hey, what's going on? It's Mehl. I'm here at CrossFit Horsepower for episode 2 of Fix Yourself, and I'm with Danielle, and we're going to go over how to squat properly, what the best cues are for the squat, and how to make sure that you're squatting correctly with good mobility. So, a lot of times we use the squat in Olympic weightlifting, for the clean and jerk, for the snatch, for the overhead squat, for the snatch balance, for a multitude of things. But we also can use it as the best way to test our mobility and make sure that we're moving correctly and efficiently. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a proper squat. So what I'm going to have Danielle do is face me, and she's going to take a hip width stance. So everyone's stance and everyone's squat is going to be different because you have different femur lengths, you have different heights, you have different body types. So don't assume that you have to squat the same way as someone else that you've seen, whether it be in your gym or on the internet or like me or like anybody else. Make sure that you understand what the best version of that squat is for you. So first thing we want to talk about is the lower leg, okay? Posture is everything in a squat. The second you start moving out of position, you become less efficient, you start using the wrong muscles. So we want to make sure we're using the right muscles and we're engaging our core. So the first things first is, I'm going to have Danielle hold her arms down at her side, just so you can see something. So if you watch her rib cage and you watch her abdomen, when she takes a deep breath to squat, she's going to think about breathing in a 360-degree motion, like if you were wearing a weight belt. You don't want to take a deep breath from your chest, because if she takes a breath from her chest, look at her lower back. It's already, you can see if she moves her arms, she's already in extension. So she's out of position before she even moves. But if she takes a deep breath from her belly, right, and breathes into her back, now she's completely vertical. It's going to make the squat a lot easier. So that's the first thing you want to start doing, is start by taking some diaphragmatic breaths, some deep breaths through your belly button, and try to put your hand on your stomach. So if Danielle puts her hand here and her hand on her lower back, she can feel the breaths coming in and out. Because once you master that, you have a really good chance of keeping a very strong, stable spine, a neutral spine in a squat. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to have Danielle cross her arms across her chest, and then take her normal squat, and we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to have her do about 3 squats, and then we'll talk about what's going on. Go ahead. Good. Good. And stop. Okay, I'm going to have her do one more slower so we can point out what's going on. Okay, so go ahead, the last squat here. Excellent. So you can see she started the squat by having her lower back arch and go into extension. At the bottom of the squat, her butt went like this, which is commonly known as a butt wink, right? And so most people think that's because of tight hamstrings or tight calves. And you may or may not have tight hamstrings or tight calves, but that's not the problem. When your butt does that and your lumbar sacrum area starts kind of shifting underneath you, it's really your hips and your pelvis trying to create space because there's some kind of restriction or tightness. Now, with a lot of high-level athletes, that can be the psoas, right, the front of the abdomen here that connects to the spine. It can be the adductor and the inner thigh. But for most people, it will be not getting the breathing right and also having a mobility or hip impingement or restriction. What we're going to do to help correct your squat is we're going to do what I call a fascial stretch. Now, when you're trying to prepare yourself to be efficient in any exercise you're going to be doing, you want to do exercises or stretches or mobility that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. You don't want to be on a foam roller for 20 minutes and then not feel prepared. And vice versa, you don't want to over warm up and get so tired and fry your central nervous system that you can't perform the workout or the lift or whatever you're doing. So I found that there's a couple exercises that are quick, that are very simple, and there's a lot of regressions and progressions to make people work on their mobility and be prepared and move correctly. So the first one is just a very simple bridge, okay? So Danielle's going to lay down on her back. Now there's different regressions and progressions. We'll show you the easiest way to do this first, and then we'll get a little bit more complicated. So the first one is, I'm going to have Danielle bend her knees so her feet are flat. She's going to walk her heels all the way back so her heels and her fingertips touch, okay? That's where you know you're at 90 and your hips are in a good place. From there, you want to press your lower back into the ground so you can feel your core muscles activate, okay? From here, you're going to drive your hips up as high as you can by squeezing your glutes. You're going to push your feet into the ground. So you should feel not only a stretch in the lower back and even the upper back area, but you also feel your hips and your glutes working. So you can hold this bridge for about 30 seconds and then drop back down, or you can do sets of 10. So you'll come up, squeeze, hold, 1, 2, 3, back down, and then you would repeat for 10. Now, a progression to that is the gymnastics bridge, where you're taking the same movement, but you're trying to create an elongated version. So Danielle is going to put her hands behind her head like this. Now, if you don't have the wrist flexibility for this, you can have a partner assist you. So this would be the assisted version. You have your position right here, your partner helps you, you're going to press up into a bridge, the person's going to support your lower back and raise up. And obviously you want to communicate with your partner and make sure that they're comfortable and you're not killing them, and I'm not making Danielle hold this forever. 10 to 20 seconds is more than enough. And then come back down under control slowly, okay? And then the progression from that would be just Danielle arching herself and pushing as hard as she can, trying to come up and squeezing her glutes. So I'm going to have her do that for about 10 seconds because I know how much she loves this one. So she's going to put herself in the same position. Nope, you're going to come down. So you're going to put your hands behind you. You're going to raise all the way up, and you're going to come up as high as you can. Now, from here, you want to make sure your head and your neck are in a neutral position right here. That way you're not stressing your spine. You're squeezing the glutes, and you're pushing the hips up towards the sky, and relax. Good. You can come down. Okay, rest. So we just went over the bridge. Now we're going to talk about another movement that you can do to engage your core to lengthen some of the muscles that are tight and that are going to affect the way you squat and get mobility, like the hip flexor, the TFL, and the quad. So one of the ways to stretch the posterior chain, we've all been taught, is the common forward fold static stretch. Well, that might be good if you do that post-workout or on your off day or rest day, but that is not going to help you when you're trying to squat and activate muscles you need to activate. So if we look at our body here, and we're in a squat position, our body's kind of like an X, the way the fascial lines run, right? So when you have restriction or immobility, it prevents you from getting into position, and it locks up your hips, and then you see this valgus collapse of the knee, and you see all kinds of things happen which are detrimental to the squat. So one of the first things you want to do is want to turn on your core muscles, right? Your abdominal muscles, your lower back, everything pretty much from your chin to your hips, front and back, we want ready to go. So one of my favorite exercises that will work your deep core muscles without any flexion of the spine is something we call a dead bug. So I'm going to have Danielle lay on her back real quick. Okay. She's going to bend her knees. So now she's going to press her lower back into the ground and make sure she understands how to breathe again back to those diaphragmatic breaths we talked about in the beginning. She's going to raise her knees up towards her chest so she's at 90 degrees. So right about here, she's going to bring both arms behind her head. So right here is the starting position. So make sure you nail this. You don't want your knees too far forward. You don't want them too far back, and put your back in extension right at 90 degrees. Okay? What she's going to do is she's going to sit up about 6 inches off the ground right here. So this is the first step. If you can hold this position without severe discomfort or without any kind of problems, you're off to a good start. Or shaking, right? So good. So that's step one. Step two is she's going to bring her left wrist to her left knee, and at the same time extend this leg. So then from there you're just going to alternate, go ahead, back and forth, slowly, under control, making that mind-body connection of pushing your back into the ground using your abdominal muscles. So we're just going to have her do it for 15 seconds, and then when we retest the squat, watch the difference on how she moves. Good. Okay, so I'm going to have you stand up.
Okay.
All right. So now, if you have it, we're going to have you face this way. Okay. So take your normal squat stance. Okay. Get your deep breath in through your rib cage, your diaphragm. Drop the ribs down. Okay. I'm going to have you squat down. Good. And then come up. So you see how there's no more butt wink. There's a stable spine. Everything's neutral. Her knee isn't turning out all the way. Her foot isn't turning out. Try it again. Good. Okay. So let's keep the stomach a little tighter. That's why you had the butt wink. Do it again. Good. Okay. So now here's something I want to point out. If let's say you start to squat, okay, and I'm going to have Danielle exaggerate here. I'm going to have her just kind of not take a deep breath and just loosen everything up. So go ahead, do a squat. So if you go to the bottom and hold it. Good. And you find that your lower back is soft and your hips drop like this, then this is too deep for you. If you cannot maintain a neutral spine, then you need to shorten your range of motion. Okay? So if we have you stand up, so let's say someone's really struggling with keeping their stomach tight or keeping the knees where they're supposed to be. So go ahead, drop down into a squat.
A bad one?
Yeah, we're going to do a modified squat here. So I'm going to have you come up, stay tight, come up a little bit. Good. So that might be your squat depth, and that's fine. Not everybody's going to squat ass to grass or as low as they possibly can. It all depends on how well you can maintain a neutral spine. Because anytime you put load on your spine, whether it be a back squat, a front squat, an overhead squat, snatch, clean and jerk, whatever, you're at risk of compression. So if you have flexion under compression, you're going to have a serious injury, or if you're lucky, you're going to escape injury but have really bad performance. So what we need to do, no matter who you are, is we need to make sure that our core is tight and activated, and we're squatting with proper depth for your body. Not for somebody else, not for your hero that you see on the internet or in other gyms you're at, but what's best for you, okay? So we've assessed her squat, we've made sure she understands the correct way to squat. So now we're gonna go over the right cues for you to cue yourself or somebody else. So I'm gonna have Danielle face the camera. So the big thing we hear all the time in squatting is knees out, knees out. Now what does that mean? Well, when we squat, I'm gonna have you bring your knees in so you can see. So if the knees come in, this is a no-no. This is bad news, right? Because then you're gonna have severe internal rotation of the hip, a valgus knee collapse, and you're gonna have a knee injury or something, similar. But we also don't want the knees out in an exaggeration, because now look at her torso. She's already forward and out of position. So if we turn this way so they can really see it. So if she squats with the knees out big time, look at her torso. It's so far forward at a 45, there's no way she's gonna be able to maintain an upright angle. So let's say she decides she wants to do a snatch, right? And she brings her hands over her head and she goes knees out. She's already out of position. She hasn't even gotten close to the bottom position and she's already out of position. So now imagine if this was real weight. She's either gonna miss the snatch or have really poor performance and use the shoulder to counterbalance. So that's where we see a lot of shoulder injuries and things like that, is that internal rotation, and it's all because of the hips. It's all because the hips are out of position. Because watch, if she goes to snatch now with this pipe, even though there's no weight on it, and she gets the core tight, right, draws that down, and thinks about maintaining an upright torso by starting with the knees. See, look at that bottom position, perfect. So we start with the knees going forward. Let your knees come forward and then sit back with the hips. Look at the depth you're able to create, okay? So, I'll take this. So in a bodyweight squat, what you want to start doing is, first things first, tight core, activate those muscles. That's why we did those exercises on the ground. So she's tight, so now she starts with the knees. Now she's going to sit back with the hips and maintain a flat back. Good, and then stand up. So you want to think of it as 3 parts, right? First, get tight. If you're not tight, you're already in trouble. You're already going to have poor movement or poor efficiency. Step 2, break at the knees. Don't think knees in, don't think knees out. Think knees straight or knees up, right? Let the knees do what they're going to do. Just don't let them collapse in. That's all you have to think about, okay? And then at the bottom, whatever the bottom is for you, right? It might be very low, it might not be very low. It's up to you. Is maintain that neutral spine and drive through the floor, press through the floor actively. Great. Okay, so the third portion of how to fix your squat is understanding the other muscles that are involved, like the adductors, the hip, and the internal rotation of the hip. We don't necessarily want tremendous internal rotation of the hip, but we do need some, especially when you're coming out of a squat. We want the knee to be able to come in if it has to generate speed to allow you to come up, especially in the Olympic lifts when you're catching something in front of you or over your head. So a great exercise that's very easy to get into position is the standing, holding the pole, internal rotation. I just made that up, no big deal. Trademark, patent pending. So I'm gonna have Danielle hold the pole here, and so she's gonna stand as close as she can, okay? She's gonna get down into a squat, all the way at the bottom. Now what she's gonna do is, she's gonna try to maintain an upright torso, keeping the stomach tight, and she's gonna internally rotate her knee all the way to the floor, and try to keep that foot down, not let the heel come up. And then she's gonna switch. So she's gonna hold it for about 2 seconds and switch, and she's gonna go back and forth and do about 5 to 10 on each side. If this is uncomfortable for you, and it's very harsh on your hip, then come up higher, right? So if, let's say Danielle is struggling or having a hard time, I'd have her come up and then do it, and she'd be able to do it a lot better and get into that position. Okay, perfect. So the next exercise in succession to that is something called a Cossack squat, which was made very famous by a Russian strength and conditioning coach named Pavel. I highly recommend checking him out. He's very, very knowledgeable and very strong. So what you're gonna do is you're essentially doing a side lunge and also adding internal and external rotation of the other leg. So I'm gonna have Danielle start feet together. Yep, she's gonna take a big step to the right and do a side lunge, maintaining an upright torso. So as soon as she hits the bottom as far as she can, she's gonna take this foot and she's gonna turn it this way and then flex the toe up. So she's gonna work a little bit of the ankle flexion, loosening that up, also get the adductor and working the hip. And then she's just gonna switch. So she's going to come all the way down, good, and then flex that toe forward in dorsiflexion, excellent, and then switch. So again, back and forth, about 5 on each side. You're not holding this like a static stretch. This is a dynamic stretch where you're providing some movement back and forth. Excellent, and stop. So now that we've discussed the right way to address your squat, the right movements to activate your core and get your hips involved and create better mobility, let's look at it with an actual weight on our back. So Danielle has the weight up high because we're going over a high bar back squat as opposed to a low bar back squat, which is more for powerlifting or even some bodybuilding, or even some people who just prefer to squat that way. So in the high bar, you need to have serious mobility of the ankles, the hips, to hit the proper depth you need and have a stable spine. So the first cue I'm going to have her do is think about drawing the ribs down and breathing into your back. Now, if you notice, see how her back tightens up and everything's rigid? That's good, that's what we want. So from there, she's going to squeeze her glutes. She's going to keep her head completely straight, her eyes fixed on something in front of her, and then she's going to drop down into that squat, maintaining a neutral spine. Good, okay. So if you notice, she started to extend and arch her back. So this was a good example of what not to do. Okay, so now we're going to fix that. So this is going to be the best way to squat, okay? So she's going to draw her ribs down. She's going to tuck her pelvis and squeeze her rear end as hard as she can. So the ribs are down. She's going to start with the knees. You see the difference? Huge difference. Didn't tuck her pelvis underneath her. She was able to stay upright. That was a strong squat. So if she's able to do that with the bar on her back, then we can test it overhead. So we're going to go into an overhead squat. Okay, so same thing goes. We're drawing the ribs down, we're squeezing the glutes, we're getting everything prepared, and all our joints to be stacked on top of each other. We don't want any misalignment because then there's going to be compensation somewhere else. So now she's going to start with the knees. Go ahead. Drop down, and then look at that. Perfect alignment of the torso. Spine is in a neutral position. Probably felt a lot easier. Good. So then the last one we're going to go over is the front squat. So if, let's say you're catching it for the clean and jerk or just working on your front squat, this can be very difficult as opposed to the other two because now it's in a different plane of motion. Now we're talking about the anterior side of your body where it's easier to get pulled out of position. So what she wants to do is she wants to engage the lats, draw everything down, stomach tight, butt tight, start with the knees. Go ahead. Excellent. Good. So if you notice, you want to think about bringing your butt between your heels, not sitting back. If she sits back to start, go ahead. Torso comes forward, she can't hit proper depth, back rounds. No good. Bad news, right? Because you're either going to drop the weight because it's too heavy, you're going to extend your back to do the work, which is not what we want, or you're just not going to be able to do maximal weights for what you're trying to accomplish. So again, she draws the ribs down, butt's tight, starts with the knees, she hits perfect depth, back is straight. Great. Awesome.